All right, so this is the third installment of the moral of the story. Nice to see some familiar faces again. Everybody, welcome back. And over the first 2 weeks, we sort of addressed two major themes within rabbinic ideals or morals that they wanted to teach us. Does anybody remember one of them started with an H and rhymed with humility? Right. Humility. Right. So, in fact, one of them that we talked about was humility, right? And then the other was the students get a kick out of that one too. So it's fun that it works for multiple ages. We talked about the theme of humility, and we're going to see that tonight again from a very different perspective. In the past, humility has been something that has been lauded and said, because of Hillel's humility, he brought 3 strangers into the Shekhinah, into the divine presence. And then last week in Abayi's Beit Midrash, we said that there was this demon that represented arrogance, and the best way to defeat this arrogance was again through humility. So tonight we're going to look at a different form of humility and see if perhaps we get a different result from it. And then the other major theme that was brought up last night, I think Beth, maybe even you mentioned this, was the idea of the rabbis being so self-aware and involving themselves in the stories, and that we can learn from the rabbinic participation and how they view themselves, right? That the fact that they're telling a story, but they would write themselves in as a character. So tonight's story is going to be, this is actually a very famous one. It's told often around Tisha B'Av time. The story is relating to, Tisha B'Av is the time when we commemorate the destruction of the temple, both temples, as well as many other calamities that befell our people. So this is a story that's often linked to Tisha B'Av. Perhaps you've heard it before. If you have, I'll hope to unlock some new insights. If you haven't heard it before, then hopefully you'll bring some new insights. But it's the story of 2 people. It's the story of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So can I just see how many of you have ever heard of this before? Maybe you've heard the names. But it's fuzzy. Okay, great. So let's defuzzify, if that's a word, and if it's not, we're gonna make it clear here. So let's tonight we'll just go right away to the Chavruta piece. The story is fairly straightforward, in that there's no real demons or any deep mysticism that we have to try and uncover. But I do want us to think about 2 questions as we're approaching the story. Number 1, who is the villain of the story? So as you're reading through, there are potentially many people who could be the villain. I'd like you to come up with, according to your understanding of the story, who is the villain? And the second question is, who here had the best opportunity to be the hero? Right? We don't necessarily have a hero in this story, but who could have been the ultimate hero, right? If they would have acted a little bit differently. So those are the 2 questions. If you forget them, they're written at the bottom of the page here. But I'll just pass this out, and we can do partners. We'll go to Chavruta, and maybe one of us will be a 3, or one of you will be a 3 that way. And so we'll just go right to it. As Hillel said, Zil Gamor, right? Go and learn. Renee, here's one. Look at that.
Why did the other teams come up with?
So let's before we even address the story, let's just sort of hash out the ideas a little bit. If each pair wants to just share, who did you see as your villain, and who did you see as your potential hero? And in many cases, you may have had more than one. So we can list out all the possibilities, and that's fine too.
Well, I thought when it says Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, it means that they are, both of them, the bad guys.
Okay,
at least 2 of them.
So the first possibility is
I
that
just believe the
Kamsa...
sentence, but I've learned by now that you can't believe anything you read. I'm sorry to say.
All right, so our first potential villain is Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, right? It's like a dynamic duo of villainry. If they're the villains, then who would be the potential hero who could have acted but didn't? Who would have been the hero?
The host.
Maybe the host would have been the hero in that case? Okay.
The rabbis at the party.
Maybe the rabbis.
Yeah, they really took a passive.
Okay, or who else could have been the hero then?
Bar
Also
Kamsa.
Zechariah ben Avkulus?
Bar Kamsa could have been a hero.
Bar Kamsa could have been a hero,
Yeah,
even if he started off as the villain. He could have had like a
Yeah.
change of heart or something.
Yeah,
Okay.
just left.
Okay.
And Kamsa never shows up, does he? Kamsa, he's a ghost.
Interesting.
Ah.
Kamsa never actually makes an appearance in the story. We're told, opening sentence, headline. By the way, Rabbi Yochanan has this verse, and he says, what does this mean? So this is kind of like that story that we saw last week when we had the little Mishnah beforehand to sort of preempt the story. We'll try to come back to Rabbi Yochanan's quote at the end and see how that can play through, what he's actually teaching us as the verse from Proverbs. But if the whole explanation is based on the existence of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, Kamsa never even appears in the story. Right? Unreal. That's got to get us thinking. It's got to get the wheels turning. We'll try to address it in just a moment.
So I think in a way Caesar could have
Yeah.
been here because he sends him a healthy calf.
Okay.
He knows the difference that the Jews won't sacrifice a non-healthy one.
Okay.
So he's giving him giving him a.
So he could have potentially been the
He's saying,
hero
"Look,
and
I'm-
saved the
I'm
day
giving-
and
I'm not
said,
gonna
see,
give-
the Jews aren't
I
rebelling
don't think
against
he's good
me."
at all. Because he doesn't even have any question about, he doesn't say, nah, they're not going to rebel against me. They love me.
Yeah, but he gives him a healthy calf. He gives him something that they know.
Yeah, but that's part of a cabal. It's part of a plot.
Yeah, he's innocent. He's pretty innocent.
The Caesar is just like an innocent bystander in this case?
He's like Achashveros.
The fact that for me, the fact that they
Depending on how
emphasize
you
the
read the
healthy
Megillah, there
calf.
could be another. Achashverosh may have had
Yeah.
some. I don't want to go there.
I was saying the fact to me that they emphasize healthy calf
Yeah.
says something to me. It's
So he was aware enough to know to
Yeah.
give them a
He's
good
only a
one.
good guy.
Yeah,
So
it's like-
so there was
at
some
least stacking the deck in their favor.
interesting.
He was just doing a clean experiment. He said, okay, let's start out with this healthy calf and see if they're really rebelling against us.
Okay, but he was also pretty quick to believe that maybe they actually are
Yeah.
rebelling against us.
Right, I don't like him at all.
So if we put this in a historical context, likely what was going on is we're starting to see a little bit of the rift of there were clearly some Jews who had strong relationships with the Roman, with the with the rule, with the leadership, but then there must have been others who didn't have such strong relationships going on at the same time, right? I don't know if that factors into the story. One of the readings of this story actually says it's all a political situation, and maybe at the end I'll share that because it's kind of neat. But I don't think that's like the essence of where it needs to come from. But it could be fascinating too. And then two morals from the same story, you get a 2-for-1 deal. Okay, any other potential villains who it could have been besides Kamsa or Bar Kamsa?
Zechariah ben Avklos.
All right, so you want to put
Yeah.
Zechariah ben Avkulus as the villain. So if he was the villain, then who could have been the potential hero in his version of the story?
He should have been.
So he also could have been his own hero.
Yeah.
Kind of like how Bar Kamsa would have had an opportunity to fix things that to fix the pot that he stirred or something. I don't know the expression, but there's some expression about it, I'm sure. Okay, so he could have been his own hero. Anybody else?
Yeah, the other rabbis that said that they should sacrifice the
Oh,
calf.
so these are the temple rabbis,
Right.
not the party rabbis.
Not
Yeah.
the party rabbis.
Okay, so temple rabbis are the villains, right? And who?
No, I'm saying
no,
they're
the
the heroes.
heroes.
because
Oh, they could have been the heroes. They could have
said-
overruled.
They overruled.
Yeah,
They said, well,
because they
according to
had
this,
Yiddish cup.
they wanted to offer it despite its disqualifying blemish to preserve
So-
good relations with the authorities.
So had they been strong enough to overrule this one guy, perhaps they could have been the heroes. Okay. Okay. Any other potential villains in the story here?
Well,
The goat.
Who are you seeing,
partially
Renee?
the rabbis wanted to kill Bar Kamsa at one point, right?
Okay.
So they're potentially villains, but they never did it. But at least they had this impulse in their hearts.
Okay. And well, let's unpack that a little bit more. What was the impetus for Bar Kamsa going to the emperor? What did he say? Look back in here and see. What's the final straw?
Because the rabbis didn't.
So we have the party rabbis.
Right, they didn't stick up for him.
Right, the party rabbis
Right.
didn't speak up.
Right.
So maybe that maybe they are the villains,
Those party
right?
rabbis.
And if the party this sounds like now I said it wasn't going to get political, and here I am talking about the party rabbis, right? The party line. So if the rabbis were the villains, then who could have been the potential hero?
The rabbis.
Would be the rabbis.
Rabbis.
Seems to make sense, right?
Yeah.
But this would be the party rabbis or the temple rabbis.
The party rabbis.
You want to say the party rabbis?
Right. They could have been
Like
potentially if they would have
those who are
said,
silent.
"Yeah, you know what? You should stick around at the party. Let them
What's
stay."
going on?
Okay, so just the fact that they didn't act now all of a sudden makes them the villains, and had they acted, they could have been the heroes.
Right.
Cool. Any other possibilities that we haven't uncovered, or this is?
Well, is there
This is a lot.
spelling between Yohanan with a Y and Yohanan with a J?
No, it's just I copied from a bunch of different
Ah,
sources and
okay.
probably should have been better about editing. But I was on a plane.
And watch this group.
Yeah.
In there, I thought.
No, the Kamsa and Bar Kamsa are the same throughout. The host is the same throughout. Yochanan and Yohanan is the same throughout. Zechariah ben Avkolus is the same throughout.
We
So
don't know about the rabbis, though, whether they were the same in the party or in the temple. or
Interesting.
not.
We're not 100% sure about that. Yeah.
So Rabbi Yochanan, is he later? A lot later? Is he like he's making his commentary on?
Yes.
Rabbi, so okay.
Yeah.
Can you explain?
This is the Rabbi Yochanan that we met last week, who's a much later
I
rabbi.
missed him. I wasn't here.
That's okay. He did some cool party tricks for us. So in case you're wondering, so he's a much later source. So he's reflecting on the
So he's
story.
reflecting comment.
Exactly. Yeah, and I tried to put a little space there
Okay.
to demonstrate that break.
And then there's the first
Yeah, there's one
sentence.
more.
There's the first sentence,
Yeah,
Proverbs.
last one.
Proverbs.
which is also Rabbi Yochanan.
Right.
So he's the bookends for the story,
Okay.
right? He's got a statement, which is what's fascinating is we start the story by saying Jerusalem was destroyed because of
Comes in.
Kamsa and Bar Kamsa, and what's our punchline at the end? Because of the humility of Zechariah ben Avkolus, our temple was destroyed, our sanctuary was burned, and we were exiled from the land.
Yes, such humility. You know, that's humility with quotation marks.
That's humility with quotation marks.
Right.
So you mean like a sarcastic humility?
Yeah,
Or okay.
That needed that word needed punctuation there? Or did-
Perhaps.
Well, which
Perhaps.
Are you talking about the one that he's describing Rabbi Zechariah?
Yeah, here, humility.
Yeah,
Was he really
humility.
humble, or was like he was?
Well,
Well,
depends
so
on
we'll
his
talk.
attention.
Let's talk it out, right? And we should figure out because humility, as we saw last week, that was the virtue that the rabbis were trying to impose upon us. To say, make sure that you're humble, right? That humility is what will defeat the arrogance in the Beit Midrash. That humility will bring people closer to the divine presence. And now all of a sudden, that same humility seems to be
Some
Here's
things
what
look like
Francine was-
humility that aren't really humility.
perhaps.
Here's what Francine was talking about, because in the opening phrase, it says, "What does this verse mean? Happy is the man that is always fearful, but he that hardens his heart shall fall evil." What Francine was saying is, okay, you should always be fearful. You know, you're out Ched, you're out Hashem, but what if you exceed what you're supposed to exceed in terms of, the amount of it? You know, what if, in keeping your principles to be always fearful, you kill the Jews?
Right.
Interesting.
If you stick to your principle and just
meaning
everything-
perhaps I'm so humble in my respect for the law and my respect and my drive
Could-
that maybe that humility is what ultimately leads to our downfall.
Yeah.
Let's try to read the story through that lens.
Can you explain one line?
Sure.
The very last line. People will say that anyone who places a blemish
Yeah.
in a sacrifice should be killed.
Let's read through the story together and maybe how about that? Because that's a fun line, right? The first thing that we should point out is that we're presented with this introductory verse, right? Ashrei Adam mefached tamid. Fortunate is the person, or happy is the person who is always fearful. Now, Bob, I wanted to point out because you mentioned like Yirei Shamayim, we're supposed to be fearful of the heavens, but it doesn't use the word in the Hebrew in the verse.
No, it doesn't.
It
It
says
just says
Ashrei Adam mefached, like actually afraid, right? Happy is the person who's always afraid. So let's put that word up here, and we'll put it in quotes, right? We're gonna have a lot of quoted words tonight. What does afraid actually mean?
Never take a risk.
That's my personal mantra.
What is?
Happy when she's afraid.
Well, what
Oh.
would my father?
So not taking risks.
You know, it's like engage brain
Is that
before starting mouth, kind of.
Engage brain before start. Oh, okay, sorry.
Self-preservation.
Before putting mouth
not
in gear.
taking
Gotta be
risks.
careful.
Not taking risks.
I mean, is that what you mean? Is
I don't know.
The kind of
I don't
risks
know.
you're talking about?
I don't know. I just put it in quotes for now. Let's see what we come up with after reading the story.
Just thinking about what the consequences are.
What are the consequences?
Not
Okay.
Taking a risk, right?
Taking a risk, yeah. All right, so Jerusalem was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. First thing to point out is, notice we don't really have a person involved in the story, right? We began by saying it was destroyed because of Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. So in Beth's group, I pointed out that perhaps there's a possibility that maybe Kamsa is a trait, as opposed to an actual person.
Id and ego kind of
Something like that. But let's look at the relationship between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa. Other than the fact that their names sound very familiar and it's very easy for them to get confused, I think the rabbis had a better sense of humor than, oh, whoops, somebody got the name wrong and then Jerusalem's destroyed. Like, it doesn't really... Our rabbis were better than that. They could have told a better story, right? So let's think, what is the relationship between Kamsa and Bar Kamsa? Kamsa, maybe we know what that word means, maybe we don't. But bar should be familiar to a lot of us. Like bar mitzvah, right? We would say, or bar yochai, son of, right? So bar, which means, now we have the two reasons that it was destroyed are because of Kamsa and the son of Kamsa.
Or the result of Kamsa,
Yeah.
if it's a trait.
Yeah,
Or maybe even the descendant
Yeah.
of, or the derivative
Derivative.
of, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's do that, and let's say Kamsa and the derivative of Kamsa, which means now we're not just looking at one level of action, but we're looking at that second layer as well. The people love this story, by the way, like all across the entire spectrum. So one idea of this, to sort of illustrate this point, would be the word kamitza, or kametz, is like what the priest would do, kamitza, to collect the grain. And that was like gathering or grasping the grain. Incidentally, this finger is called the kamitza finger. In Hebrew, there's etzba and ama and then kamitza, because it was the three fingers was the measure of the scoop. So if kamsa means to grasp, so then we can read it. There was a man who was a close friend of kamsa, or he enjoyed grasping, but his enemy was bar kamsa, right? But he didn't enjoy all of the next generation derivatives that came from that grasping. For example, think about it, an easy example without placing any judgments in any way, shape, or form would be, I would like to have a car. That would be my kamsa. The bar kamsa would be, what is the ecological footprint of that car, or the carbon footprint.
So
No judgments, politics one way or another,
Well, bringing-
please. I'm
bringing
not trying to shift one side or another, just that every acquisition that we make also has some sort of derivative that we may or may not care about. And in this case, right, maybe the host of the party, right, he liked that acquisition or whatever that was and didn't much care for the results, right? So therefore, when the results were presented at the party, get out of here, I don't want you here. Okay, that's very, very abstract. I think we can do a better job on a more literal level, but if you're interested in that, then enjoy that one and file it away as a fun treat. Yes, sir.
So bringing judgment back into it, is this a comment of the rabbis of the Talmud against the priestly rabbis? For corruption?
Interesting. How would you see it through?
Well, if they're grasping, and what they're grasping is the sacrifice, and people are bringing the sacrifice to the temple, and this is all written after the destruction of the temple, and the punchline is, what destroyed the temple? Then maybe the original thing that destroyed the temple was the sense of entitlement of the rabbis of the priests of the temple in the first place.
Okay, that works. That could be a good reading.
All right, back to the story.
No, I like it. I mean, it's. I think it. It's funny because growing up, I had always heard the reasons for why the temple was destroyed of sinat chinam, right? Baseless hatred from one Jew to another, which exists in rabbinic literature, right? That is a phrase that happens somewhere. But like this is a story that's going to tell us. And by the way, because of all this, one thing led to another, or rather, perhaps we're going to see all the derivatives of that initial action. Right, and so maybe that's what ultimately ends up leading to the temple. So perhaps the priestly corruption may have been an element of it, and I think it's.
I mean, that happens in life too.
I think you could read it in here. Absolutely. But go ahead, Francine.
One mess up leads to another mess up unless you stop
Sure.
it. Yeah.
Sure. Okay. So all right. So let's read the story as though they were people. Right. We'll put all the abstractions away for a moment. Okay. So Kamsa is supposed to come to the party. Instead, Bar Kamsa shows up. By the way, nobody thought that the servant should be the villain. Maybe?
Yeah, he made the mistake.
He's the one who made the mistake.
Right.
Or maybe he did it on purpose.
Did he make a mistake, right? If he did it on purpose, then for sure he's the villain, right? So let's put him up on the board just as a possibility. And then if the servant was the villain, who could have been the hero?
Oh, the host?
The host, right?
I think the story just says he's a shlemazel, not a shlemiel, because because they don't discuss him.
Who, the servant?
Yeah.
Right.
They let it go at that. He doesn't seem to have any evil intent.
Right. We don't have pretty much anybody's intent here, right? We just have the actions. But maybe there's something to that all we're seeing is the actions, and it's up to us to try and describe intent. And we'll either be right or we won't, but if we find something meaningful out of it, so then I think that's part of the wisdom of the story. Okay, so Bar Kamsa is sitting at the table at the party. The host sees him and says, "Get out of here, right? You're my enemy. What are you doing here?" Why is the host so particular about who is at his party, right? Presumably there are a lot of people there, and it can't be the first time that only one person who you don't like has been at your party, but this whole interaction is something fascinating. Right, and then they go back and forth. Do we want to act it out like a little play? I sort of put the dialogue.
It's interesting.
So let's get who would like to be our Bar Kamsa sitting at the party, please. You'll be Bar Kamsa?
Sure.
All right, way to step up. You don't have to be the villain. You can be. There are many versions of the story where Bar Kamsa is not the villain. All right, and we need someone to be the host, please.
I'll be the host.
Ron, you're gonna be the host. All right. So how about we'll do from he said to him, right in the middle of that first big paragraph. Since you are my enemy. The host goes first.
Okay. Since you are my enemy, what are you doing here? Get up and leave.
Since I have come, leave me be. I will pay for everything I eat and drink.
No.
I will pay for half of the party.
No.
I will pay for the entire party.
No.
Okay. And then, all right. And then he takes him by the hands, picks him up, and throws him out. And now Bar Kamsa has his final epilogue, the reflection, where he says,
Since the rabbis were sitting there and did not protest, it seems that what happened was acceptable to them. I will go slander them before the emperor.
okay, right, and several of you pointed out, who is this Bar Kamsa guy to think that, since the rabbis just disagreed, I'm going to go ruin the entire Jewish people, right? We've now blown things out of proportion, right? And perhaps understandably so, or perhaps intentionally so. When you guys were Milton, right? When you guys were talking in your group, you came up with an interesting thought about the idea of compromise, right? That was something that I heard from you guys, right? Would you mind sharing that with the rest of the group here? Either of you guys, either one.
Frankly, I don't recall what.
Nobody in the story compromises.
Okay, right. We saw that nobody's
nobody-
compromising.
So
right?
everybody's just standing to their thought, and nobody compromises.
Right.
It's all black and white.
It seems very black and white.
And nobody's humble.
And we don't see that humility the way we would have expected to see it, right? Can I share with you guys a quick little insight here I'm breaking the story up halfway through before we continue.
No. Sure.
If we look at the Aramaic root, the Aramaic root of the word kamsa, so in Hebrew, kamsa, like a kamsan, would be somebody who's miserly, right? I think that comes from the acquisition root. But in Aramaic, a kamsa is a grasshopper. So the entire destruction of Jerusalem happened because of a grasshopper and the derivative of the grasshopper. Now, the Talmud has this uncanny ability to assume that we have read all of the Bible. and that we know all of the Bible by heart. So when they make a reference like this, they assume that we're going to know it. Fortunately for us, I don't assume that we're going to know it. So if you look in the back of the page, right, there's one very, very famous biblical verse where the word grasshopper is actually used. Could we have somebody read that one out loud for us, please?
So they gave out to the sons of Israel,
Yeah, please.
the sons of Israel a bad report of the land which they had scouted, saying, the land through which we have gone in scouting it is a land that devours its inhabitants, and all the people whom we saw in it are men of great size. There also we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, a part of the Nephilim, and we became like grasshoppers in our own sight, and so we were in their sight.
Okay, so what's this scene?
The 10 spies.
This is the 10 spies. I'm actually going to call them scouts, right? Because they were sent out to scout the land. Spies wouldn't go out with a huge ceremony where, if you read the beginning of Bamidbar, Moses announces, and from this tribe, it's like a starting lineups for like a basketball game. And from the tribe of Judah, here he is, and then they call out the guy, and the people are clapping, and there's a whole big thing. You don't send spies that way, right? You send scouts. We're going to go look towards the land. He was trying to build it up. Right? Conversely, when Joshua, this is another tangent here, when Joshua sends spies into the land, he sends 2 spies into the land, and he sends them quietly, and nobody else knows that they got sent. And they sneak in, and they end up staying in like some tiny corner of Jericho, right? Like, that's how you send spies, right? So I like to call these people scouts, because they were there to scout out the land and to give us a report. So that being said, that's just my own idiosyncrasy, but thank you. You didn't have to like it. That one was for me to like, but if you do, that's a bonus. So what's so fascinating here is that they report on the land and they say it's a land, people of great size, and so we are going to see ourselves as grasshoppers, right? And if you look at Onkelos, who writes the Aramaic translation there, he actually uses the word kamtza, right? He says we were like a kamtza there. We were like grasshoppers to them. And in our own sight, we are like, and so were we in our own eyes, right? We were also like grasshoppers. So in this case, let's take this idea of grasshoppers. What does it mean to be a grasshopper? What is your vision when you're a grasshopper?
Pretty low to the ground.
Pretty low to the ground, right?
Oh, we get stepped on.
You may get stepped on. Oh, maybe that's our fearful idea, right? Perhaps we'll come to that one in a minute. But as far as what's your perspective when you're looking around? If you're a tiny grasshopper, if you view yourself as a grasshopper,
Everybody's a giant.
everybody else is a giant, which means everybody else is a threat, right? Everybody else is a threat, and so therefore I don't really see the whole picture so well, right? In fact, could you say that my vision is very narrow or short-sighted in a sense, right? And Francine, you guys were talking about this in your group. Would you mind sharing, remember that comment I told you to hold on to about...
Holding on to your thoughts.
Yeah, exactly.
And holding on to your principles so much that it destroys everybody around you.
So when you hold on to your principles so much and you can't see the other side, right? Now the entire city of Jerusalem was destroyed because of kamtza, that short-sightedness, and bar kamtza, that derivative of all of that short-sightedness. Is that one of those? Aha! I saw a couple light bulbs go. Mm-hmm. Right? Let's go back to the story and finish this out now.
The short-sightedness is.
It's all over. It's rampant throughout the story.
But mostly because you're so strict in your vision that you won't compromise, or you're so purist.
So where do we see it? Right? In history terms, we call this zealotry. Right? It was that extremism. Where did you see short-sightedness in this story? There's several examples. Go ahead, call them out.
He kicks him out at the beginning.
He kicks him out. Even the guy's willing to pay for the whole party, right? Like, you could make an easy buck off of this guy. But nope, I'm not even willing to, not going to compromise my morals because he is not my friend. He does not belong at this party. That's one example of short-sightedness. What else?
Go slander them.
That's right. Yeah. I can't handle it anymore. The rabbis are against me. These rabbis at this tiny party, maybe it was a big party, but these rabbis at this party didn't speak up. I'm going to go destroy the entire Jewish people now. Okay? What else?
Rabbis who could have easily.
The rabbis could have spoken up,
Knock it off, guys.
right?
Yeah.
Who else?
Caesar.
Caesar, right? I heard one opinion. Jews must be bad. That fits with my worldview, so I'm going to act on that information alone without doing any research to understand anything bigger. Yeah.
Zechariah.
And
Yeah,
then,
because
and then
the rabbis gave
ultimately,
a lie, right?
Yeah,
They wanted to
Zechariah.
sacrifice it.
and right. So now we
They
see the
almost got
rabbis
it
maybe
right.
made a turn and said, hey, we pushed it too far. But Zechariah ben Avkulus says, no.
can't
If we
sacrifice
lose
a
sight of this,
large animal, yeah.
we're going to miss our
So,
our bigger
so
picture.
that's the rabbis of the temple, right? But the rabbis at the party are more of these zealots, like the guy who was telling the story.
So it's unclear if they're the same rabbis or not. I did a little bit of research into it in Eicha Rabbah, which is the Midrash book of commentary on Eicha, which is the Megillah that's read on Tisha B'Av. There's actually a line that it's almost identical story to this one, but it adds one line that says the rabbis were there and Zechariah ben Avkulus was among them and they didn't speak up. So in that case, now you see it really sharpens that zealotry even that much more. That what was going on in that situation, or perhaps we could even ask, what type of party was this, right? Maybe this was a political planning party. Maybe this is around the time of uprising against Jerusalem. If you want to go that route, right? You could. Maybe this is like maybe it was important who was at the party. You didn't want the wrong people at the party, because if they went to go tell the Romans, right, then there go your plans, there goes your surprise, there goes your strategy, right? So maybe it was important, maybe they knew, actually, and we do have certain references, other places in the Gemara elsewhere that say that when they went to a party, they knew everybody who was on the guest list, or when they went to a restaurant, they knew who prepared the food and who was eating and who was all the, right? And it's not just for punctilious reasons. It's not just they were so fastidious in like mitzvot and they wanted to know kosher, but probably because you could only eat in certain places. If this is a time of actual political unrest, so then you got to know who your friends are and who you can sit and who you can eat with, and if the wrong person's at your party, you're not on the guest list, we don't want you here because you're going to hear something and we can't talk freely with you here, and we don't want you.
If that's what they're afraid of, well, the guy just plays it right out. That's the first thing he does is he goes to the Caesar. So they obviously think that this guy he's not one of, in other words, you could say that they are hard-hearted and didn't even take the guy's money, but maybe the principle they were resting on was something, worthier than
Perhaps.
what we are suggesting.
Right.
And they were right.
So his actions justify them not wanting him there,
Yeah.
right? So it's sort of like,
But you don't see them trying, even.
so you don't see them trying to pacify.
But if you put it in that political context, why would you?
Yeah.
If somebody is in your midst, that on the other this other side, look, if there's a Democratic caucus going on and a Republican wanders in, you don't keep talking and say, oh, well, welcome in. And if he says, yeah, but I'll take care of the donuts, I'll pay for all that, you still don't let him in.
Right.
Well, maybe you should.
Well, look what happened with Spectre.
Maybe you let
They let
him
him in.
Democrat.
Very funny.
No,
I
but
mean,
the
point
reality
is,
is,
that's so funny.
we're talking about our strategy for the next election. We don't want you here. You can pay for the whole year of food, but like we don't want you to know our strategy, so you don't belong here, right? That seems to be a very fair, around what you're saying. Like that would make a lot of sense in that way.
But when does adhering to your core values become zealotry?
Becomes what?
I wish I knew.
becomes
That's that tipping point. You could. There's so many examples of it today.
Sure.
You can go through that over and over and over again.
So should we look at that example of humility, which is that value that the rabbis championed so much, and yet here now becomes the downfall, right? Let's fast forward to that part, right? So he goes to the Caesar and he says, okay, we want to get this fine calf. Caesar gives him the calf. Bar Kamsa puts a blemish on the calf. By the way, did you guys notice the location of the blemish?
Upper lip.
Lip.
Upper lip. Our lip is used for
Lashon hara.
Lashon hara, right? It's that speech. Maybe we were so short-sighted in our speech, right? There could have been a way. One of the ways to fix this is if that blemish wasn't on the lips, right? Or where's the other potential reason? Like, we're not really sure where the blemish was. It may have actually been on the eye, right?
Sight.
Maybe we short-sighted, right? Like, I think the rabbis are screaming at that point, like, "Hello, don't miss this. Look here," right? When they could have just said they put a blemish on the animal and a place that matters for us and doesn't matter for them. But the fact is, it may have been the mouth or it may have been the eyes, means they're screaming at us, pay attention to what we're telling you here. The placement of a blemish is significant, right? Short-sightedness or the speech not being focused. Maybe, in fact, maybe there was something else going on at the party. Maybe Bar Kamsa heard some dialogue. Let's play the political angle for a minute. Maybe what Bar Kamsa heard was actually plotting of a rebellion. Right? Maybe he actually did hear of people violating laws and he went to the Caesar to tell him that. The Jews are rebelling against you. Well, how do you know? I heard it at a party. Okay, they cut that line of dialogue out. That's not exciting. You don't need the proof. Try this. See if they'll send it. Right? I don't know. Right? I mean, we clearly don't have every single event of the story. Right? And we could certainly come up with details to fill in the gaps. But the reality is, with what we do have here, there's a significant piece that maybe we're not seeing things exactly clearly, right? Maybe we weren't speaking as correctly as we should have been. So the blemish was on our lips, or the blemish was on our eyes. Through that blemish, through that short-sightedness, we'll call it again, that's what's destroying our temple, right? So now let's go, Bar Kamsa brings it back to the temple. The rabbis said, hey, you know what? We've gone too far, right? We went too far. We need to offer this now, right? We're for the sake of the people, for the sake of appeasing the government, right? We're not going to risk our own idea. We're not trying to be martyrs here.
Shoot ourselves in the foot.
We're not going to shoot ourselves in the foot or the mouth or the eye, right? Right. We're going to offer it. Now comes Zachariah ben Avkolus and he says, "But guys, notice he doesn't say don't offer it, right? He's not taking a stand here, right? Notice that?
He's just giving them
He
the
says,
argument.
but if we do, right? This is like yeshiva. What'd you call it, Bob? The Yiddish cup, right? This is like ultimate thumbing yeshiva, right? When they make this motion, but then there's also this motion, and then there's this one, and then but you forgot about this one. And then if you get really into it, you start to swing the thumbs because here comes the big one, right? And that's the rationale that's going on here, right? So we're afraid that if we sacrifice this animal, what are people going to come and think? That if we offer this animal with a blemish on it, they're going to think that it's okay to offer blemished animals. How do you get there? Right? Like, who's watching these offerings and who's going to even be able to see this tiny blemish, right? Maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I don't know, right? Maybe they would see it. And maybe people would come to an incorrect halachic understanding of what animals can and can't be offered. But it's fascinating that that's his biggest concern. Right? The rabbis are trying to save their lives, and his humility is so focused on, but we're going to get the law wrong. Okay?
Why are you using the word humility?
Because that's the word the Gemara says, an v'tanu to. Right at the last break, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, an v'tanu to shall Rabbi Zachariah ben Ankulus. His anava, his humility there. Perhaps humility in this case means like fastidiousness, right? Or maybe, I think that's the right word. Is that the right word? I don't know. His attention to the detail, to the most precise degree, right? Like, I don't want to transgress God's command even in the slightest, right? Mm-hmm. That's sort of the humility, is, the humility towards the halacha, right? The law is the binding piece, and I don't want to transgress it even in the slightest.
I thought humility is a different form of the word humble.
I agree with you.
Okay.
I
didn't.
Remember
I was looking at the paragraph above.
Okay.
I see the paragraph below. It actually uses the word humility.
Yes.
But remember in
So
Jewish...
why are they using the word humility in that context? Is this because they're trying to make a point, or I guess I'm...
So perhaps there's some sarcastic tone to it. Perhaps there's a little bit of a bite or a sting
totally.
there, right? Like, hey, we've been trying to teach you to be humble, right? But don't go too far, right? Don't forget about the whole purpose of being humble is to be able to live by God's mitzvot, right? We're not trying to kill ourselves.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
See, in
Right.
Jewish, humility
Doesn't
is
sound like
not
he's being humble.
self-abnegation.
In enforcing the rules,
That's
it sounds like it's
humility.
the opposite. It's like he's so
We got it out.
hoity-toity that he is.
Let's
he's-
go ahead, please.
But he's humbling. What I was saying before is,
Yeah.
he's humbling the immediate earthly needs to God's ultimate truth and faith. You know, it's like saying, you know, I'm going to put aside what logically seems we need right now, and bowing to a greater.
Oh, humility
Truth.
to God.
Yeah.
There you go.
Okay.
Humility to halacha, humility
Yeah.
to the law, capital T, capital L.
Yeah.
Yeah, but
Yeah, but
he's missing, right?
Go ahead.
He's being humble to this very grasshopper-sized,
This
point.
short-sightedness that he can't
But he's
see
missing
beyond.
the big picture.
There you go. There you go. Which is
Or-
missing that big picture may have been what destroyed our temple, as I think the opening line
But
shares.
is that the ultimate big picture? Ultimately.
What do you mean?
Well, that's the picture we see, but maybe there's a bigger picture than that.
Perhaps.
so the biggest picture of all is you got a bunch of dead Jews lying around and no smoking
Right.
temple.
Right,
That's
no,
the
I-
big picture.
Right.
Waiting for Mashiach.
Right. And it's a lot easier to
I mean,
reflect back on it also
Yeah.
afterwards, right? Rabbi Yochanan says, "Oh, see, this is the moment that destroyed the temple was him not being willing to sacrifice." Well, we're not chastising Rabbi Zachariah for not being willing to sacrifice or not being willing to compromise. We're chastising his abundant humility that he couldn't see beyond the law in a form of practical application of it. Right?
And the calf
See,
walking
the
away.
ultimate of self-abnegation is the abnegation of the Jewish people. And that's what just happened. So humility in Jewish is not self-abnegation. So that's what he's saying here.
Right.
Rethink that.
We don't take it to an extreme like that. We're not supposed to take it to an extreme. like
Correct.
that. That's martyr.
It
that's,
seems to be, right? That-
the self-defense sort of thing, right?
Sure.
There's a time when it really is appropriate to act.
Renee, what were you thinking?
Yeah, it's the one story where the calf gets to live.
Similar? Humility,
Are
modesty?
humility and modesty similar? I think you could say yes. Right? I think in essence, modesty is putting the self sort of second to some greater concession, right? You have to concede that something is bigger than you or is greater than you. So I would sort of see. Yeah, I could see that. I mean, almost synonymous, I would think. Maybe there's a slight
I
distinction.
wouldn't, because in Jewish you can say that okay, what I did is great.
Yes.
You can say that.
Yes.
It's just the difference who you thank for it. Is what I did great because I'm such a monster talent, or is what I did great because I was granted this talent by God and I wouldn't have had it if God didn't grant it to me. I'm thankful for God
Sure.
for that. That's humility in Jewish.
Right, which is, I think, similar to modesty, no? Or is modesty, you're
Modesty
saying,
is-
is not even acknowledging that I was great from the beginning?
Well, it's just keeping it all down. It's not stepping out. Not making the
Okay.
projection,
All right, I'll hear that.
staying
So
under
this is-
wraps.
Sure.
So this is calling for some kind of compromise.
So is it calling for compromise or is it calling for action?
Compromise, action, what's the difference? Compromise, it could imply action, right?
Okay,
Yeah.
it could.
But
Right.
I'm thinking, so we've had, for thousands of years, this idea of, I guess, compromise with your enemy, don't rock the boat,
Mhm.
don't, pay them off, get rid of them somehow. And it's
Sure.
always worked, right, until recently. So is that
It's
trying to
repellent.
support this idea?
Well, I think here the statement is more that Rabbi Zachariah ben Avkolus froze himself, actually. Like, he was unable to act. Right? Meaning not only could he not compromise, but he just couldn't move. Right? Like he said, well, I don't want to do that because then people are going to get the wrong idea about the law of sacrificing animals with blemishes. Well, then fine, let's just kill Bar Kamsa and he'll never report back to the emperor. No, because then people are going to think if you bring a blemished animal, then you should be killed. So I don't want them to do this, I don't want them to do this, I don't want them to do this. So he just froze himself, right? And we don't have a rationale for action,
Bless you.
right? The rabbis gave us a reason. Let's offer it, right? Why are we offering it? Okay, we realize it's wrong, but we want to save our lives. So that is a rationale that would govern a life philosophy, right? You have certain laws, but if your life is on the line, you can, adjust some of those, or you can compromise a little bit there.
So
Maybe I didn't
you're
understand the
saying-
question
So
as much.
humility here is that's the same as freezing up at that last sentence, because he froze up.
Yeah.
Therefore, the temple was destroyed.
In this case, right? Like he was so humble, he didn't want to do the wrong thing, right? He didn't want to make the wrong law. He didn't want to teach incorrectly,
Yeah,
so he
yeah.
ends up teaching nothing. And in that case, now the rabbis come back and say, that inability to be decisive,
Yeah.
right? That he was so humble that he didn't want to say the wrong thing,
Yeah.
but that inability to have courage was what destroyed us.
Why did he have the final word?
Why did he have the final word?
Yeah.
Because that's how the story's told.
Okay.
No, I mean,
Okay, it's good enough.
I don't know much about him.
Yeah.
I was curious because I know like some great Kohanim in the temple, like Rabbi Tarfon. I mean, like we have big names of guys. I'd never heard of this guy before outside of this story.
So obviously other people had humility toward him, because if the other rabbis disagreed with him, and then he comes up and presents this conundrum,
Yeah.
and they back off
So
Father,
right, there's something bigger going on.
because the temple was ultimately destroyed.
This
Right.
guy's the son
And we were
of-
exiled.
Right.
Well, how about Avkolos? Zachariah is the son of Avkolos.
Yeah.
What is Avkolos? Sounds all kinds of Greek to me. Does that make any?
Anklos is the man, isn't that? Isn't that
No.
the Greek word for man?
Av
Anklos.
is
Isn't it?
father.
It is.
Unkolos, but
Yeah, Unkolos.
Avkolos.
Av-
Avkolos sounds kind of similar, right?
Yeah, it does.
So is there a statement that because he's the son of Avkolos, he's making these joker decisions? So what is Avkolos? What? Because if Kamsa is Bar Kamsa is the son of Kamsa, then
Yeah.
this guy's the son of Avkolos. So now we have to think of what is Avkolos. He's a derivative of Avkolos.
You know
Doesn't
what?
that sound Greek? So
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's out of place, sort of.
Let me look up in the Jastro here for a minute and see if we find anything. Kufresh. Avkolos means Eukolos, father of Rabbi Zachariah.
There you go.
Av.
But compare with Apikolus. All right, so maybe there's another reference here.
Worry about the law.
Yeah.
The result is lost everything.
Apikoros.
It could be something like Apikorus. Apikolus, though, is
Yeah.
very similar to it. Okay,
Yeah,
Lamed
it
Mem
was.
Nun Samech Ayin Pei.
Why isn't it quotes? That's what it said.
People will then think that they're going
Lamed
to
Mem.
People who said yes, they wanted to kill. Their second choice
No.
was to kill the guy, and he won't go and inform on us. And he said, we can't do that either.
Chorin. No, I'm just getting. It's playing.
So maybe it's
Without
just,
restraint.
Maybe that's just.
Here we
his
go.
name.
It's related to Apikorin, which is without restraint. Examples
For a
are.
ridiculous reason.
I don't know.
But that's Apikoros. But how about?
That's
Apikolos?
Apikolos related to
So much of this stuff.
sorry. What was it? Avkolus
Avkolus, yeah.
relates to Apikolus.
It does.
Yeah. It says compare with, and so I compared it to there, and then it says it's actually related to the verb apikorin. This must be how like Aramaic or how Greek works. I wish I were a better linguist about that. But it says it's an adverb meaning without restraint is apikorin. So it must be something related to that. So this idea
That's interesting.
of absolute
So
extremism.
he's the
or
son of
something.
that.
Yeah.
Just the way that Bar Kamsa is the son of Kamsa.
Yeah, which makes sense then, right? Because that's what we see from him is that ultimate end.
And everything in here is in here for a reason, so it can't be random.
Sure, right. And especially when you have a name like this guy does not appear, he doesn't have many other teachings in the Talmud. In fact, it's really easy nowadays. You just type in the name of Kolus, and it only comes up in one other context, which, if you look on the back page, we have here for us today.
How'd that happen?
Look at that. Right? Well, one of these days you'll be sitting everyone around the computers, click, 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 and everyone's going to pull it up on their own, right? But so let's read this story, because here we have a little another. I think this is going to help us understand Zachariah ben Avkolus. You have a thought or response to this, or?
Yeah,
Okay.
see if I can hold it.
All right. Quick little background. On Shabbat, there are certain things that are permitted and certain things that we're supposed to refrain from. Fire is one of those, right? Now, there's no actual prohibition on a match, right? A match itself is not a problem. It's the fire that's the problem. But the rabbis said, let's create a distinction here, or create a boundary here, or a separation, and say matches are going to fall into a category of stuff that we're going to call muktzah, right? Things that should be set aside before Shabbat. They don't really serve a purpose for us on Shabbat. They're not technically forbidden, but we're going to make them forbidden so that way you don't come to light a fire on Shabbat, right? Matches is the easiest example because fire is one that people know you're not supposed to make fire on Shabbat. Other muktzah categories, muktzah literally means to set aside, right? The idea is that we're supposed to interact with our Shabbat world in a Shabbat way, and things that aren't so important for that Shabbat world, we set aside for the day, and then we can resume them afterwards, right? So garbage, for example, is something that would be called muktzah, right? Because it's just disgusting and just gross. We don't want to interact with it on Shabbat. That being said, there are ways that if your garbage can is full, then perhaps that hurts your enjoyment of the day, so you're allowed to move that in a particular way,
What's it
right?
called?
You can...
What? There's a name for it.
For a name for what?
The if you see something offensive, you can move it. So
Like hazmana? If you
it's pre something or something pre. Anyway, I'll look it up.
Okay. If you do, let me know, because maybe
Okay.
it's another way that I don't know to talk about it, so that's helpful.
Okay.
But the idea is that certain things are set aside, we could then move them. But there's a debate as to if you want to move something that's muktzah, can you move it itself? Or do you have to go about like a roundabout way of doing it? An example would be like a lamp, right? So let's assume it's an incandescent bulb, right? That's like a pure example of fire, not like an electrical or fluorescent or halogen. Those are all different debates that I don't want to get into. But let's assume you have, even a candle, all right? Let's say you've got a candle, right? That candle is allowed to burn on Shabbat, right? You lit it before Friday night. Okay, it's beautiful. I'm not talking about the 2 candles that we lit on the Shabbat table because those have a special category. But let's say you wanted to have dinner by candlelight, a romantic Friday night dinner. Wonderful. You've got a candle sitting on the table. This is just a regular candle just sitting there. Now let's say you wanted to move the candle because you wanted to, it was blocking the way and you couldn't see the person that you were trying to talk to. Or you wanted to go sit on the couch now, and so you wanted to have the candle there so you could read by candlelight. There's a discussion or a debate. Could you move the candle itself, or could you move the base that the candle is on? Like let's say it was on a tray or something. If I move the tray, I'm really moving the tray. The candle just happens to be going along for the ride. Right? That's one of these. Remember how we said we were thumbing ourselves a little bit? So it's there's a lot of thumbs that get involved in discussions on muktzah. That's all the background for now. There's a debate here in the Mishnah between Beit Hillel and Beit Shammai. Beit Shammai says one may remove bones and nutshells from the table. Presumably these are bones of food that you've just eaten, right? We're not like stacking bones on our table, right? You have a couple of bones, you just ate the food, which means these bones now have no more purpose on Shabbat, right? Or nutshells. We ate the nuts and now the shells are just lying around. We have 0 use for them on Shabbat. So technically they fall into the category of muktzah, right? Because they serve 0 Shabbat purpose now. They used to when they had food in them, but now that there's no more food, they're just on their own. So the question is, can we move them? right? And Beit Shammai says you can just pick them up and move them, right? And you can just throw them out right away, or you can take them away from the table. Now, Beit Hillel says, nope, you have to take away the whole tray and shake it off. And in doing so, the bones and the nutshells are going to fall off, but you shouldn't be handling the muktzah itself. Okay? Did I lose
Sounds
anybody?
backwards from how they usually.
What do you mean?
I always think
Hillel
of Shammai as being
usually has a
stricter.
sensible view.
I always think of Shammai as being stricter. I guess picking them up is.
Because you missed our first week. We don't like to call Hillel and Shammai strict or lenient. We put them on a continuum of innovative versus preservation, as far as what is their understanding of the halachic process.
Okay.
And if you do that, then Hillel's statement is actually very innovative, that I don't have to be touching the muktzah. That's freeing and liberating in a way, right? I shouldn't be interacting with this muktzah, but whatever.
Okay.
That's for this is not that class, so it doesn't have to be. Fine. So that's our discussion and our debate. The kernels of Syrian dates may be handled since they are fit for cattle on account of their parent source, right? The dates themselves were able to be eaten by humans, so those kernels of Syrian dates are not officially muktzah, right? Those can still be given to your cows. You can give for animal food. Great. But the seeds of Persian dates, those are forbidden because they're inedible and the cows can't handle them either. So let's say you were having your wonderful, delicious Persian dates for dinner or maybe for dessert, right? And now you've got the pits sitting on the table. What do you do with them? Rav Huna, the son of Rabbi Yehoshua, says, just set aside a little basket beforehand. We call this a trash can,
That's
right?
the pre-something. So what is it saying? How do you translate pot of excrements in the
Garaf
text?
shel rieh.
Garaf shel rieh. Right, that's what it is. It's not
Yeah?
pre, right.
Oh,
That's
okay.
what it is. That's the concept.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So there it is, right? Garaf shel rieh. You have this pot of excrement, or basically what we would call a trash can, right? You set aside this little bucket, and in here is going to be all of my garbage, and I'm just going to put the garbage in there. Right? And Rav Ashi says, but wait a minute, are you allowed to create a garbage can on Shabbat? Like that pot of excrement didn't exist beforehand. You can't just create a brand new magic bin on Shabbat. Like, how dare you? So they say, you know what? We have a response to this too. Rav Sheshet would throw them away. Remember, we're talking about the pits of the Persian dates here. I know we went a long way to get here, right? But Rav Sheshet, how did he dispose of them?
Behind the couch? Oh, no.
He would spit them out with his tongue, okay? I'm not going to touch them. I'm just going to spit them out. The end, right? I put the date in, I eat the date, and I spit out the seed. The end. Okay? People do that, actually. Like, it's with sunflower seeds especially. You see it all the time, right? And that way I don't have to physically be touching or moving the muktzah, right? Rav Papa, he would throw them behind the couch.
Spit them behind the couch?
No, he would take them out of his hand, right? I'm allowed to move it, right? He's in the in the Beit Shammai camp. I'm allowed to move it, but I'm moving it to a place where it's not important anymore. Okay? Now,
Under the bed.
right, like throwing it under the bed, right? Because they
Put it in
ate
the
on the
closet,
couches,
close
right?
the
This
door.
wasn't okay. So now, finally, we get to the guy we were looking for, Rav Zechariah ben Avkolus. He's going to come in and resolve the situation for us. How does he decide?
He does both.
Yeah.
He does both.
He doesn't.
Which is what he's
Or-
the indecisive guy.
Or neither.
Or neither, right?
Right? He turns his face to the back of the couch and then spits them out. Right? So what we're seeing from Rav Zechariah ben Avkolus is, and this is the only other time that we see him in the Talmud, right? He doesn't want to make that wrong decision.
No commitment.
Right? No commitment. Could we push it even farther and say no courage? Right? Perhaps what the rabbis are saying here,
Doesn't take a risk.
perhaps what the rabbis were
He's
saying
fearful.
here, right, is,
But is he happy?
well, hold on a second, because they said happy is the one who's always afraid,
Right.
right? But, so, in one sense, Rav Zechariah ben Avkolus is that first part of that quote,
Right.
right? He's always afraid.
Right.
Fortunate, because he's going to
Be happy.
he's going to be happy, and he's going to always come to a proper decision, right? He's come up with this brilliant this brilliant way of appeasing all of the opinions out there, but he never decided anything, right? So, what's the second half of the quote?
But he that
He that
hardens his heart shall
Shall fall into evil or something, right? Or shall fall out of evil, right? Or because of evil, right? So when you go so far extreme that your heart is no longer a part of the decision-making process, right? You've hardened your heart so much that you're not even taking the emotional arguments into account, right? Because think back to the story. The rabbis said, forget the logic for a minute. Emotionally, we need to save our people. And he said, but let's think about the logic, right? People are going to understand the law wrong. They're going to understand incorrectly. So, what ends up happening as a result? He was fearful, but he hardened his heart, and so evil befell him and his surroundings, right? What I would contend is this view of afraid then, I sort of think of it like a skittish mouse, right? Who's always looking around, right? Taking stock of everything that's around you. Don't be fearful in this tiny little grasshopper, mini, no perspective, short-sightedness afraid. Don't just be afraid of God. Be afraid of everything. Be afraid in every possible way. Perhaps, rather than afraid, I'm going to take a liberal stretch here, but maybe what they mean by someone who's really, really afraid is somebody who is attentive, right? Think about it driving in a car. If you were actually afraid of getting into a car accident, right? And I don't know if anybody texts and stuff while driving. That's not none of my business at all, right? But if you were actually afraid of getting into a car accident, you would think about what level of attentiveness that would be. About paying attention. There was a person there. There was a leaf falling. There was what's that? What's in my rearview mirror? It's almost distracting to that angle, but at the same time, you're becoming aware of everything around you, right? And fortunate is that person who is able to be that aware of everything around them, right? Because of that short-sightedness and all of the derivations of that short-sightedness, Jerusalem was destroyed. Right? Thoughts?
He could have figured out that this was really a kosher animal. And because, there was probably some way to work out the fact that it became unkosher, I'm guessing there was a way to describe that sabotage action and, a workaround.
Meaning there might have been a way to...
He needed a workaround.
Sure.
It was one of those times, and...
Who did?
Zechariah ben Avkolus.
Yeah.
But it was...
Perhaps they could have found a way even to allow it.
But it was sabotage. But but he still had to think his way around that and say, well, the important thing here isn't that it's blemished; it's that what's going to happen if we don't sacrifice it.
That's right. That's what I mean.
Yeah, right.
He could only focus on the blemish. He forgot to
Right.
focus on the fact that their mortal, powerful enemy actually sent them something acceptable, and he needed to follow
Right.
follow that line. He just lost sight of what he was supposed to understand.
Sure.
This assumes that they figured out that
What do you call it?
Kamsa Bar Kamsa created the blemish.
Well, it seems that Bar Kamsa created the blemish.
Well, that's there,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
but it's the rabbis figured
Maybe
that
they
out.
didn't know.
But it doesn't matter.
Well, he was walking back. If we read, he's the one who's bringing the back from the Caesar, right? He's bringing the cow back.
It says he placed the blemish, but once the blemish is
No, I get it. So
Yeah.
I'm saying,
Right.
but you were just saying that.
Yeah, because they said they want to kill him for putting the blemish there.
Correct. So they
Yeah.
figured out that he put the blemish.
Yeah.
there. How did they? So.
Investigation.
Okay.
Well, not kill him because he put the blemish there, but kill him so he wouldn't
Go
go back
forward.
to
No, I get
the
that.
Caesar
So-
and give him the report. Okay.
Right. So he seems like a really bad guy.
Bar Kamsa.
Yeah. I mean,
He's the derivation of short-sightedness. Imagine, like, if you know what happens in one scene of short-sightedness, imagine what the offspring or the generations of that are. I mean, that's
Gets shorter and shorter.
exactly.
So there's one more
Or
thing.
narrower and narrower, right?
One more, I don't know if this has come up, but the very last sentence, Rabbi Yohanan said, the humility of Rabbi Zechariah ben Avkolus destroyed our temple, burned our sanctuary, and exiled us from our land.
Yeah.
It was the Romans that did all that.
Well, if you read it as in who actually destroyed it, then yes. But what was the reason that the Romans were able to come in and destroy? because Zechariah ben Avkolus never actually made his decision. Right? He wouldn't offer the animal.
If the animal had been sacrificed, the Romans would have done it.
That's presumably if he would have offered,
Yes.
he would have said they would have just spared their lives. Yeah.
You think. You hope that you can have that kind of assumption and faith in
Right.
the Romans.
Moral is hire a wedding planner next time. Hire a party planner next time.
Yeah, and get a good bouncer at the gate, at the door.
Well, it's easy. It's always easier to not make an exception. It's always harder to know when it is time to make the exception.
So
But
I think the rabbis here, notice by the way, I think the rabbis are being very self-aware, saying we had an opportunity to act and we didn't. Right?
But that's the history of the world. That's what probably every single conflict, war, whatever. I mean, there's always somebody saying, this is the core value, this is what we have to compromise. No, we can't. Yes, we should.
But even at
nobody
the
can
party-
really see the future.
But even at the party, the rabbis could have acted. Right? Even at the party, they were there.
Yeah,
right?
they
The
could
story
have.
includes that the
Yeah.
rabbis were there.
Yep.
So maybe they're saying, had we acted sooner, maybe the Kamsa Bar Kamsa, we could have stopped it before it would have.
But then you
gotten
could, you
too
could also
big.
make the argument that if you assume that rabbis are wise men,
Okay.
then there's a reason why they did.
Or
Whatever
perhaps,
that could be.
Or perhaps they're here to teach us now that don't make the same mistakes.
Maybe.
Right? I mean that.
Yeah.
Right? I'm always impressed with the rabbis' ability to be so self-aware.
Yeah.
Right? The fact that they include themselves, they don't have to appear in this story, and it would totally work fine. Right? Especially the fact that the rabbis are the ones who are writing it, so they could have very easily taken that one line out and not put themselves at the party. Right? They could have very easily not brought up the line that said, we need to sacrifice this to save our lives. But they're putting themselves there, and they're putting themselves as we weren't courageous enough to overpower this one idea, or we didn't, we didn't make the decision the way it needed to be made.
They never consulted the wives.
And the wives are always right. That's the first rule in the Talmud. The wives are always right. No, but I'm not even joking. Anytime you see the women, anytime you see the women in the Talmud, they always have amazing pearls of wisdom. When they're quoted by name and they're part of the story. Yeah.
Because the rabbis were smart.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for a wonderful evening.
Really
Thank you.
This is a story that is often brought up around Tisha B'Av time because it recalls the destruction of the temple, and I think that as we think about that baseless hatred, perhaps if we could expand our view. Oh, you guys missed that. Was such a good pun. Perhaps if we were to expand our view of Tisha B'Av a little bit, and not be so short-sighted about the one reason why Tisha B'Av happened, but maybe we can broaden the perspective that perhaps through short-sightedness some calamities befall the world as well. So may we be brave enough to be willing to hear the other sides and to see the other perspectives, and through those efforts may we help to bring about the rebuilding of a strong, united, collective Jewish people. So,
Amen.
have a wonderful evening.
Yeah, you